Alrighty, folks. It looks like we've got a good turnout today, and it's right at 1 o'clock here, so I'm going to start things rolling here. Thanks for taking the time to be here. So I'm in Missouri. It's an amazing day for mid-August here in Missouri, and hopefully you're all getting some good weather as well. We're here today to talk about elderberry benefits with Chris Patton, who has already been telling me about some of the benefits, and elderberries really seem to be the hot commodity this year, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But thanks everybody for being here. We're gonna get things rolling with Chris in just a second, but I'll do just a brief introduction to the Savannah Institute for any of you that might not be familiar with us. The Savannah Institute is a nonprofit organization working to promote agroforestry and perennial agriculture throughout the Midwest. We're a fairly young organization, but we've got a lot going on these days. We're in the second year of offering an on-farm apprenticeship program. We're establishing a number of demonstration farms. We currently have 1 in Wisconsin and 3 in Illinois, and we're working on expanding that. And we do everything we can to support up and coming tree crops and perennial crops, which is why we're going to be talking today about elderberry. And just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If everyone could keep themselves muted throughout the presentation today, please make use of the chat function. If you think up any questions at any point during the presentation today, feel free to add that in the chat. And the format of how we're going to do things today is we're going to start off with a pre-recorded video. It's about half an hour long. That's Chris Patton and Terry Durham having a conversation together. So we'll all watch that together in the webinar, and then we'll follow that up with a half an hour of question and answer. So as you're thinking, as questions come to you, don't be afraid to add it into the comments section, and we'll get into that after we get done with the first video. So, and then you can also use the hand raise function if you're familiar with that. Might take me a minute to find it in this view, but I'll check back with you on that. That's another way to let me know if you have a question you want to ask, or if you're having trouble with the chat function or anything like that. I think I should have it set so that everyone is muted except me and Chris, so we hopefully won't be getting anybody's dogs barking or construction noises.
I turned my phone off.
Okay, yeah. Got our phones off. So yeah, I'll try to keep all the technology going and the technology working, and really we're just here today to learn from Chris and to give those of you here a chance to ask your questions and provide some comments. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Chris Patton to give himself a quick introduction here.
Thanks, Jacob. First of all, I want to start out with, don't be shy in your questions after this is over. This is going to be recorded. It's going to be available for other folks that can't be, online at this time of day. And so your question is probably going to be something somebody else might ask. So if it's there, please do that. I've already interacted with a number of people on social media and told them this is going to be recorded, because they said, oh, I can't make it. No, this will be here. This will be around. And Savannah Institute will have it on their website. And I think when it's all done, we'll probably have some links and things on the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative website. And I do want to say that there is a tremendous amount of information on the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative website. You'll see that's midwest-elderberry.coop, or if you just search Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, we come right up. It's actually now 3 websites. I had so much material, I tried to reorganize it some so it's a little bit easier for people to track things. So it brings it up to a more of a customer orientation. It has a brief introduction to things about growing and health. But on the growing and health pages, if you go down a paragraph or 2, there's a link to another sub-site where there's a great deal more information on the research about elderberry, the health benefits, potential health benefits is probably the best way to do it, because we have incomplete, research. We've got good research, but in today's day, you need a lot more research than what we have in order to make certain claims. And so we don't do that. And especially on our products and things, we're very limited in what we can put. But elderberry has tremendous, tremendous potential and a long history as a healing herb. And you should be aware of that when you're considering the growing, because the people out there understand that. And I provide some, I think, pretty good place to start on research so that folks can substantiate that, or to go through and say, okay, what have the researchers done? And I've got herbalists as well as the peer-reviewed academic journal articles there. So it's a good variety. And that is what creates demand, because one of the nice things is that every elderberry grown commercially in this country is already sold as I sit here. I already have buyers calling me up, and I can't make too many promises, even though we're adding acres every year, and so far the harvest is looking pretty good. It's going to be all gone. And so even for us right now, I'm only telling people to count on bulk frozen berries, because it pays the farmers the most. If we try to go to dried berries of some kind, or frozen juice, which are other ingredients we've done, that doesn't deliver the same net profit to the farmer. So that we may not make those this year. We will have limited amounts of freeze-dried berries, I tell them that, and that is a big future, but we also need more volume for that. We only have small volume production on freeze-dried berries, so we can't satisfy. I was talking to a major candy maker the last couple of weeks, a well-known natural brand, and I can't provide them what they need every month for their new product that they wanted to include freeze-dried elderberries. And so I don't make those promises if we can't do that. Then Terry and I have worked together for over 9 years. I market the River Hills Harvest retail products for him nationally. He markets, directly to a lot and out of the Missouri area, and I do outside of Missouri. And so Terry is also on the board of Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, and the co-op and his River Hills Harvest are partners in a lot of different activities. And so this is, sometimes people wonder, well, how do you know, how does this go? But this is how it works. And I heard Terry back at the Moses Conference in 2011, February 2011, and we've been working together ever since. And Terry has a lot more experience directly as a commercial farmer for decades. I do not. My background is more marketing and organizational development management, but I did farm for 6 years with Paul Otten, who had 40, 50 years experience farming all different kinds of berries, currants, aronia, everything, raspberries, scout the kazoo, and I learned a lot from him, and I have farmed and worked elderberry 6 years solid for him in the field. So I have that area of experience that I will use in answering your questions afterwards. But there may be some things that we'll just have to defer to Terry if there's a specific thing like how many pounds of fertilizer for, that kind of stuff per acre and things. I haven't had to do that because Paul did that or Terry's done that. So I don't need to say any more at this point. I think you've got an idea of where we're coming from.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So now we're going to switch over to the pre-recorded video portion of today's webinar to get us going. So this will be a conversation between Chris and Terry Durham.
Hello, I'm Terry Durham with River Hills Harvest, and I've been growing elderberries for a couple decades. And I'm here today with my partner, Chris Patton.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm president of the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative. And like Terry said, we've been working together for over 10 years and selling his best tasting elderberry products, least processed in the world, River Hills Harvest. And through the cooperative, we're looking to coordinate and help growers across the country. And elderberry is a very interesting little native berry. We mostly focus on the Canadensis version here in the Midwest, But elderberry as a whole, it can be found all over the world, and it has a very long history, doesn't it, Terry?
It does. You know, elderberry, sambucus, the kind of family of elderberry, grows on every continent except Antarctica. And there are all different kinds of sizes and shapes. There's little dwarf ones, 3 foot tall, to some giant trees that are 20 and 30 foot tall and 20 inches in diameter at the base. But there's only certain elderberries that have really good qualities for medicinal use and for consumption. There are ones that grow that are black and purple, which are the main ones that we use for medicine, but there are also red ones and yellow ones and white ones.
A lot of people ask me about the red elderberries, and really you don't want to eat those. Even the Native Americans only looked on them as being survival food, and you had to cook it to death. You don't want those red elderberries in your pot.
That's right. In a lot of places around the world, the native elderberries need to be cooked a lot before they're consumed. Unlike the canadensis, our native elderberry here to the United States doesn't need to be cooked as much to be consumed. But we're going to talk a little bit about the history. You know that elderberry has been used for thousands of years for medicine and for tools. And some of the first uses for elderberry were to use it for a fire blowing stick, and people would use that hollow tube because elderberry has a pith in the middle of the stem that's easily pushed out, and sometimes insects actually eat that pith out, so you have a stick that's like a giant straw. Mm-hmm. And early man figured out that they could use that to blow on a fire. They used it for fire sticks, which is really where elderberry gets its name, I think, isn't it, Chris?
Oh, yes. A lot of people think, elder means elder as in older, but actually it's Old Anglo-Saxon, eld, and that has to do with fire. So it is technically a fireberry, and that's because they use the sticks, just as you were talking about.
To make the fire. Well, if you didn't have any way to make a fire, and you had to collect a fire from nature and then keep it going all the time to stay warm and cook anything, you'd really want to be able to get on that fire and get that last little coal going so it wouldn't go out. And so even as we went through history, the ancient Greeks used elderberry a lot, and Hippocrates wrote an entire book on elderberry, all about the medicinal uses. And he believed he could use any part of the plant for medicine or food, and he could heal any part of the body with a particular part of the plant. He used the berries, the flowers, the stems, the bark. He even used the pith on the inside. He even used the funguses that grew on the outside of the elderberry.
And that's really interesting because with Hippocrates, you get the documentation of those medicinal and healing properties, whereas elderberry was used by other indigenous cultures from very ancient times all over the world. In Florida, they found a woman preserved in the swamps there, thousands of years old, that had been using elderberries to cure some kind of disease. But the nice thing is that with Hippocrates, it's documented. And this is one of the reasons why elderberry is a very well-established crop in Europe and has not been one here in the United States until recently.
That's right. And so we've started about 20 years ago. There started being a little bit of research here in the United States on the American elderberry, the canadensis. And over the last 10 years, we have seen a lot of new research done on developing new types of elderberries, new selections, and then learning about the nutritional value of the elderberry itself.
And it's the University of Missouri that's predominantly led on that. There's been some interest in other universities and some smaller studies, but thanks to the University of Missouri, we are actually here today to talk to you about the viability of elderberry as a cash crop commercially if you're a farmer growing, or certainly you can use it around the house for many different ways.
So elderberry is filled with great health benefits. In the university, one of the new papers they just wrote, they have 171 health-promoting chemicals that you can find in elderberries.
And I think that's a good place to start. I think with this section today, we will talk a little bit more about the nutrition of the elderberry, some of its medicinal potential. We mostly have to talk about potential other than the traditional uses in which it was used for many different things. And we also want to cover some of the ecological benefits of elderberry and that you can use in planning where you actually use the plant and how you use the plant on your farm or your land.
So, what are some of the nutritional values then, Chris?
Well, I look at it this way. Elderberry has a very small package. I mean, it's a tiny berry. I get about 6 of them on my thumb when I pick them by hand, of course, which is one of the reasons why it's not a commercial crop, because there is still a lot of hand labor involved. And it's a small package, but it packs a tremendous nutritional punch. Elderberry has a greater variety of antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. It's 171 they found at the University of Missouri than many other berries. So what you'll find in elderberries is, and like, all edible berries are really good for your health. I mean, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, huckleberries, any kind of those berries are really good for you. But elderberry kind of goes across the board in having a greater variety and density per pound of these nutrients.
And it also works for chickens, the chickens like those berries, and all the birds like those berries because they're filled with all those great antioxidants and anti-inflammatories.
And that's where we are right now. We have a lot more, shall we say, traditional uses of the elderberry for health and nutritional benefits. Most of what's been available commercially in the market is supplements. Comes in the form of supplements, and they're using imported European concentrate and extracts for the most case. That's because it is an established industry in Europe. They have the infrastructure in place. Our elderberry actually really does taste much better, and so River Hills Harvest is focused on foods, a pure juice, jams, jellies, health cordial with honey, cinnamon, and cloves. And that's the idea is it should be part of your diet, just like you when I eat bananas or apples, having it as a fruit portion. But with elderberry, you get 7 different antioxidants. They're very strong anti-inflammatories and antivirals. And we know this from a lot of different studies over the years, and also the potential has been shown from the traditional uses of elderberry.
So and the European elder, the Nigra, only has 5 of those antioxidants, whereas the American elderberry has 7 of them. And some of those extra 2 are pretty important to us because they stabilize. One of them stabilizes all the other antioxidants in the juice itself and keeps it really fresh and really nice dark purple color, even when we process it and put it into a bottle.
And when I looked at the USDA charts, elderberry has the highest concentration of vitamin A per weight of any fruit. That is any berry, not any fruit. And was number 2 in vitamin C after strawberries. And vitamin C is very important as far as preserving the antioxidants and other nutrients.
And so the antioxidants are really, really great for the medicinal uses that are in the elderberry also. And a lot of research is starting to be done with the antioxidants, the ones that are in elderberry, and to begin to be studied. A lot of research has been done with the European variety of elderberry. Now we're starting to get more and more done with our American elderberry, which is a better berry than the European elder.
Better in that it has better tasting. We don't have the glycosides, which is the protocyanides that everyone's been worried about for so many years. And we have a greater variety of antioxidants. And what's very good about elderberry, and this would be true also for the Nigra, is that you don't need very much. It's a small berry, and that's a hint that you only need a small portion to get the nutrition that your body can use and absorb. So typically, if you're getting a couple tablespoons worth of elderberry juice or berries a day, you're getting a lot of nutrition for that weight. But you're not harmed if you eat more than that. And if you space it out over time, you give your body a chance. I mean, you could have it 3 times a day, and I know some people that do and swear by it.
I like to take mine 3 times a day. I know that.
I do at least twice.
So we should talk a little bit maybe about some of the research that's currently been going on or has been going on in the recent past that have to do with the medicinal.
And I have a lot of that documented on the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative website, and that's just midwest-elderberry.coop, co-op. And there's a main page that you come up to, and there's a health tab, but under that there is a secondary link to another little site, because there really is an awful lot of research. In 2013, we had an international symposium hosted by the University of Missouri in Columbia, and I have, for instance, on the website, 19 of those papers. I have extracts, extended quotes from the authors themselves about what they found. And there's links to if you want to get all of the papers and to read about that symposium. We also have a mix there of what I'd say the traditional uses, some health, nutritionist kind of things, physical health, physical fitness types of articles, and then we have the peer-reviewed academic journal articles. I tried to get a mix because those journal articles can be pretty heavy reading for some people. And in a few cases, I've tried to summarize those articles up front, listed points, and then link back to tell you where back you can find it in the main article. I have the whole article there. So with all the footnotes, if you want to read the footnotes will be there. So that'll be the best way for you to get an idea of the current research. But we have a lot of indications that elderberry can reduce inflammation generally throughout the body. So like with your joints, if you've got arthritis, if you have any kind of autoimmune issue, elderberry is going to help you. Around the edges, if not directly with the issue itself, we don't have enough information to be overly specific, but I do have some articles about how it helps diabetes and prediabetes on there for you to read. It's also been shown in mouse studies, which were done at the University of Missouri.
There's some really great work they've done there, and where they've been working with Alzheimer's.
Right.
Well, and the Alzheimer's research is being done with humans, and they have done.
Yes, they started out with the mice, then later did the humans.
They have done 2 replicated trials now with humans where they have reversed the cognitive degeneration of Alzheimer's patients just using pure elderberry juice. And we're hoping to get the 3rd round of those replicated trials going. The first 2 were super successful. The people that were in it now are buying elderberry juice all the time because they could see how it worked for them. Another of the experiments they've been doing, research they've been doing in one of the mouse trials, is with prostate cancer, where they have cured prostate cancer in mice in the early research, and they are beginning to work more with that. And the 3rd and most current that they're working on is with oxidative stress and stroke recovery, which is really amazing results that they're getting in those mouth studies.
It reversed the damage 20%.
Yes.
That's really significant.
From 80 to 20, only 20% of damage that you would regularly have if you're doing the elderberry juice ahead of time, you'd have a stroke. And that oxidative stress stuff, also, they're starting to study it for marathon runners or pilots, people that have high exertion. So there's quite a bit of different work that's beginning to go on in a number of levels, and we like to see that, and there's more to come.
Well, and that's the nice thing about elderberry, because it is not just a one-trick pony. A lot of people think about elderberry in the flu or colds, but actually it helps the whole system of the body. And so if you're consuming it for one reason, you will get benefits in other areas. And that's really a very nice thing about that little berry. And it's not really sweet. I call it sweet neutral because it has a positive Brix, but it's only about half that of a grape. And so that makes it a good mixer. And usually, well, I like it straight, but most people, especially starting out, they want to put it in spritzy water or lemonade or tea or something. Or smoothie is very common.
After a little while, though, when you drink that straight juice, your body learns to love that flavor, and it will crave that fresh juice every day.
And like many of the dark berries, it also is calming to take at night. It helps you to go to sleep a little bit more easily, too.
So the elderberry is a beautiful plant, and hopefully you've seen it, in June, July. There'll be big white flowers on it. It's easy to spot.
Even on the freeway when you're going by,
on the freeway, anywhere. But it does so many different things to so many different places in our environment and in our health. You know, we see it. We see these big, giant flowers, those fruit. We love to use the fruit to make different products. Makes great juice, and you can make muffins and wine and lots of things out of the berries. And then we learn we can make more and more things out of the flowers. Mm-hmm. They're quite delicious. You can make shrubs and syrups. And in Europe, about half of the crop is wild harvested elder flowers.
Right, which they put in sodas and teas and fusions. And then a liqueur.
And in liqueurs.
That a lot of people are familiar with. And we have some local breweries and distilleries that are making similar products with our native elderflowers, which I think are better quality and a little lighter tasting.
Oh, we love to work with the elderflowers. But, you know, it's not just us that benefit from the elderberry.
No.
You know, the elderberry also brings in all kinds of native pollinators. Now, the European elderberries they require bees or cross-pollination because they come from where the native honeybees come from. The American elderberry does not require bees for pollination. Most of the pollination happens from insects and from the wind. The Lincoln University has been doing a pollination or an insect study where they've been sampling, and they've found 67 different native pollinators now that are coming in to feed on the elderberry because it will make external nectar on the outside of its bark.
Right.
Just where the flowers are attaching onto the plant, there'll be two little bumps there, and they produce this clear little drop of nectar.
Ambrosia.
And all these insects come in there, and they want to be in there in the daytime, and they can just go up there and get a little drink. The fireflies are wonderful on them, and they'll eat. Then at night they go up to the top. It's a big platform, and they can fly off in the distance. So there's a lot of insects that use those, and a lot of the little parasitoids and the little wasps that protect our other crops. They need that nectar to help us. So
I've seen a lot of those little wasps and wild bees and things on it.
And so then we go on down the plant to elderberry. It's helping the birds and the people love to eat the fruit. The flowers are attractive to the insects and to us, and it makes that beautiful nectar. And then all the way down to the roots. You know, elderberry has a large rhizome of a root, and it's very dependent on microorganisms and in the soil to get a lot of its nutrients because it's got that small root system. So it actually hooks up right with the mycorrhizals. They'll send a little filament into the root and go about 3 cell levels in there, and they make a little carbuncle, a little thing almost like a little teeny mushroom on the inside of the root. And that's where they trade nutrients with the elderberry, because an elderberry will give up 20% of the carbohydrates it makes to directly feed the soil. So we've got this feeding of the soil going on where the mycorrhizals are coming in there. And now some of the new research is showing us how protozoa and some of the other bacteria and things that live in the soil that benefit us will set right at the end of those little root hairs. And the elderberry will just sit there and exude juice to them and feed those microorganisms. And then they'll get fat, and then the microorganisms in the soil can't grow, can't move very fast. They're small. So the root will encase those organisms a little bit, and through like osmosis, it will suck the juice out of them for protein and nutrients, but it doesn't kill them.
That's
and then it'll do it, and then it spits them back out into the atmosphere so it can fatten them up again, and it'll harvest again. So they build these communities of organisms that help it, that rely on it. They have to trade back and forth. So the elderberry, so we're helping through the berries and the flowers. We have the nectar. We go all the way down where it's helping the soil, and then all that mycorrhizal activity and the root of the elderberry, it stabilizes the soil. Because the mycelial in the soil, from the mycorrhizals and stuff, they really bind the soil together. They help hold the particles together so your soil becomes healthier.
And those roots will go out. I mean,
they'll grow a long ways.
And they'll spread, like a raspberry does, but of course there's no thorns. But I've had them come up 6-8 feet away. But that's showing you how far the roots are going out there and helping that soil.
And they harbor feed and harbor other kinds of microorganisms. I remember when I first started studying organic farming back in the early 70s, in the Rodale book of Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening was our main thing. And in there's a place where Rodale's talking about how it's really important to have an elderberry grow around your compost pile. And I read that. I didn't understand it for years and years, but then, because he never said much about it, but now we understand why he wanted an elderberry there, because that will grow and re-inoculate your compost pile with the beneficial organisms and help them stay alive around on the roots where they're feeding each other over there. And so that elderberry is important because you're moving compost in and out, putting new stuff in there, and the elderberry's there maintaining the microorganisms underneath your compost pile.
Now, see, I learned something today. I happen to have one elderberry bunch that's 3 feet away and another one that's 4 foot away from my own compost pile. And so they grow real well there, of course.
They love it. By your chicken house and by your compost pile.
It's nice that they're giving back that way, too.
And so it's amazing all the ecological benefits that elderberry has out there. It's not just that delicious juice that feeds us, or all the native insects, the pollinators that come in there.
The elderberry wine.
The elderberry wine that comes off of it, and then it feeds the soil and holds the soil in place. It's just a magic plant.
Oh, and you can use it. You can use it in your homestead. It makes a great windbreak. It's nice to give you sort of a leafy, flowery, verdant kind of wall. I live in the city right now, and I've got this wall of elderberry and grapevines, and it's kind of like you don't even know other stuff's going on out there. It's very nice for that. And on a farm setting, it can also be used as a windbreak. It also, with those real extensive root networks, it's great for controlling erosion. It really sucks up a lot of nitrogen out of the soil because it's a fast-growing plant. And so some people are using that in riparian buffers. But it's a sort of a mid-story plant. They'll get anywhere from 6 to 12 feet tall in 1 year's growth.
Because we like to cut them down every year.
Yeah,
and I see another really good aspect of the elderberry is to use them in your agricultural systems, where you're trying to slow down the water, putting buffers in and contours on the land, slow the water down, make more use of it. And the elderberry fits right in there between your other crops because it doesn't get so big that it's going to shade anything out like if you planted walnut trees in there. Eventually they were going to be shading out a lot of your other crop field. So we see growers using them in a lot of different ways where they may plant their rows of elderberries every 40 foot apart so that they can take some hay in between there. Maybe they want to grow some asparagus between their elderberries or some other crops. And the diversity out there in the field really is good to have a mixture of different things in the field. I've always liked to try to put blocks, no more than 5 rows of each selection. Then every 10th row, we'd like to do a habitat row, which would be a permaculture row or a row of nut trees with other kinds of bushes in there. We like to use hazelnuts and blackberries for us, black raspberries, currants, things like that. And you have that habitat row there because the biology needs more habitat than just the elderberry, even though it's really wonderful. And the insects need other places to go and to hide and to overwinter.
Yeah, biological diversity is very important.
And so having those forest rows every so often are important, and it keeps the wind down and it breaks up the fields.
Prairie sections in some places. But don't make the mistake of putting it under trees and expecting much of a yield.
No.
The elderberry needs that sun.
I was just out at a really beautiful apple orchard, and they were doing really great, but they had planted their elderberries right next to a row of tall trees, and you could see how when they didn't get enough light, they weren't getting pollinated good. They weren't
Right.
they weren't setting fruit because the plant knows how much energy it's going to be able to make.
Right.
And if it's not getting enough light, it can't not make enough energy, and it can't make as much fruit. And it kind of knows, well, I'm not ready for that. I'm going to just not pollinate that, or I'm going to get rid of those berries because we don't have enough light to support the amount.
Or it doesn't really grow very well either. It's shorter, smaller, wimpier.
Right. But they'll grow in the shade, but they don't make
They
much
won't
fruit.
produce. Yep. And then as you were talking about the soil, that's another thing. I get questions about that all the time. Some soils are not as friendly. I mean, elderberry is pretty tough, but when you're trying to get a new plant established, you want to at least get that core area favorably treated with composted soil because it needs that mycorrhizal fungal type environment. You need that leafy mold and stuff that's sort of decomposing, has that fungal kind of smell in order to support the plant. And once the plant gets going, then those roots will go out through clay or sand or whatever and help colonize and improve the soil that's there. But elderberry does need that composted kind of
It needs
material.
a compost. Well, our best growers probably put 50 cubic yards of compost on an acre to start
Right.
with.
Right.
The elderberry story is just fantastic. The medicinal value, the nutritional benefits, and all of these ecological benefits that elderberry has and gives to us are just amazing.
Well, the commercial yield per acre, we haven't talked a lot about that in this.
No, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, but it's good.
But we think that the elderberry should be planted on more farms, and it will grow in almost every state. We have people growing it. It grows best here in the Midwest, and we would love to see you growing elderberries and getting them in to make your community healthy.
It's one of I think, the key crops that is very good for the environment, very good for the farmer in many ways commercially, and you're producing a product, whether it be berries or flowers, that's going to be very good for the consumer. And we just need more of it. We have a lot of companies that have interest in elderberry or an elderberry flavor in their product line, and we do not have enough supply. But even if you're not looking at it from commercially, you should have elderberry in your life. I've got 6 clumps in my yard. You should at least have 1 or 2 in yours.
Well, we hope you grow elderberries, and we will see you later. If you have any questions and you're watching this webinar, you'll be able to ask them now.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to jump into the Q&A section here. We've already had a few questions come in through the chat. If you have a question that you'd like to ask Chris, you can type it into the chat and I'll see it there, or you can go down at the bottom where it's got an icon that says reactions. It's got a little smiley face, and you can click on that and there's a clapping hand or a thumbs up, and we'll just take either of those to mean that you have a question, and we'll get you unmuted so that you can ask that. So I see somebody using that already. That's great. So we've got Chris, first question here. Can you explain how, it's got a big word in it, how elderberry is immunomodulating?
Okay, so immunomodulating, by that means it's sort of evening out the immune system. And I'm not a scientist, but my sense on that is because it has such a wide variety of nutrients and anti-inflammatory and antioxidants that it's working at a lot of different levels. And so elderberry helps the body to balance itself. And so in the process of overall balancing, it's going to help balance the immune system as well. So you'll find traditional uses of elderberry for things like allergies and some other immune system related issues where it's given because it does alleviate the symptoms. It reduces it. It may not totally take care of the problem, but it makes it better. So that's as close as I can get on that.
Okay. And then we have a couple questions that are all kind of touching on the same thing, which is whether people are focusing on American varieties, European varieties, if they're involved, what some of the preferred varieties are. If you could just say a little bit about that.
Okay, so the number one reason why we don't do a lot with the European is because you cannot cut them to the ground. It's a tree form. It has to be pruned, so it is more labor intense. There are a number of smaller scale growers, some more traditional herbal folks who use, especially along the East Coast, who grow some of the Niagara. And the aroma of the flowers of the European Niagara is different from that of the Canadensis. And so there you're getting into an issue of flavor, smell, aromas, you know, and everyone has their own favorites on that. And so if you're competing and you're coming at it from the perspective of the European aromas and things on the flowers, then you're going to want to use that for the Niagara. And so farmers will grow that. It does not seem to do as well in many places in the Midwest as the Canadensis. And I have one in my yard that's called Marge, which is a European adapted that does very well up in Minnesota. It's very strong. It's one of the earliest to bloom and green out, and one of the last to lose its leaves. But again, it's tree form. So right now, it's even though I prune it back to about 3 or 4 feet, it's standing 12 feet and perhaps higher in my yard right now. And so actually to pick some of these, I actually cut the cane to bring the berries down to where I could reach them, rather than going out and getting a ladder, because it's very prolific and it's very strong. And I'm planning to move some of it with me a little bit later anyway, because I am moving to South Dakota here in the next month. But Canadensis is all of the wild, naturally occurring elderberry across the middle of the country. You'll find it anywhere from east of the Rockies all the way to Florida, and it's not well studied. And so there's variety in there that we don't really understand and have not classified completely. So for instance, 2 years ago, I had a researcher who spent a few days with me, but overall some weeks and months, studying elder flowers across this country and into Canada. She was from the University of Nottingham, the UK, and had multiple decades experience in working with European elder flowers. And she said that the elder flowers in New England did not have much aroma. And we know that those here in the Midwest are just overpowering with their aroma. And so that's a huge difference in my mind. And I don't know if that's subspecies or whatever. And then when the horticulturalists and folks start looking at the DNA, the problem is that because elderberry is not a large scale commercial crop, getting funds to support university research is difficult. The money that's available tends to be raised by or devoted towards those crops that have a greater dollar impact for a particular state. And then from a land grant university point of view, you can sort of understand that. However, we are finding increased interest, particularly through Forever Green Initiative across the Midwest, which was started at the University of Minnesota, and exploring elderberry and aronia and black currants and some of these other specialty crops to enhance and expand their role in agricultural product diversity, crop diversity, not only for the ingredients that they can provide that are very healthy and desirable, but also for their environmental benefits in general that we touched on in the video. So cultivars that are most popular right now in the Midwest are Ranch, Adams, and Bob Gordon. And generally speaking, elderberry is determinate or indeterminate. I think Terry and I are going to address this a little bit more in some of the subsequent videos that we did together. But determinate means basically it flowers and blooms once. Indeterminate means it will keep flowering and blooming as long as it has a growing season, and which could be up to 3 times in some place like Florida. Typically in the Midwest, indeterminates will give you 2 sets of flowers and berries. So About this time of year, Adams in Minnesota, the berries are becoming ripe. Typically when I was farming, we'd be harvesting the end of August. And at that time, there would be flowers 2 feet above the berries we were harvesting. And those berries would come into October. So we could have technically 2 harvests. Adams is a very, it's an older cultivar from out of New York. And it's a good standard, it provides a good berry. Bob Gordon and Ranch, which are extremely popular, are determinate. They only are harvested once. They only flower and fruit once. Ranch is a couple weeks earlier than Bob Gordon, so that helps with planning your crop and harvesting, which is still primarily by hand. And so labor concerns are a big factor in, you know, what scope you have for your elderberry production. But those are the most popular. University of Missouri has released some others like Wildwood, which is an indeterminate. It's not as widely used because it tends to sway and it's more floppy, and so it's harder to maintain your rows because you need to be able to be mowing between your elder rows all through the season to keep them in place. Otherwise, the shoots just come up and you'll end up with one single field of canes. And so being able to mow it regularly and easily is very important, and it's easier to do that if you have a more vertical stance on the canes. And Ranch and Adams and Bob Gordon all tend to do that. One other thing is that advantage that comes from cutting it down every year is that your plants don't get as tall as if you are using a wild one that you prune. And I have several of those in my yard that I've been experimenting with. And for those in more extreme northern climates, this could be a good strategy for a moderate amount of elder using those that you don't cut back all the way, but just prune. But these berries that come off of a plant that's pruned or naturally in the wild tend to also be smaller, and they tend to ripen more unevenly. Whereas the berries that come off of the first year growth, what we call a primal cane, tend to be larger, fewer in number, and they tend to ripen more evenly. So those are all advantages, you know, on the efficiency from the crop side of things.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And we're getting lots of good questions in the chat here. So thanks to everybody who is submitting a question. And just to keep an eye on the time, I know I don't have to be anywhere at 2 o'clock. Chris, are you able to stay on?
I can stay. That's not a problem.
Okay, that sounds great. And if any of you need to take off at 2 or take off earlier, that's fine, but we'll just keep going with some of our questions here.
Get the other questions.
What's that?
They can come back and get the tape later and zoom ahead and get the other questions.
That's right. Yeah. All right. So our next question, I'll just go down the list here. We have a question. We would like to start some elderberries next year in preparation to using them more extensively in the future. How many of each variety would you recommend for starting?
Okay, so I've always suggested people start slow and test a couple different varieties. And as and it really depends on your farming operation. I mean, I can talk to someone and say, well, you can start with 100 plants and that's a lot for them. And for someone else, 20 acres is not much, because they're used to farming a lot. The thing to remember with elder is that you've got a hand harvest and we have a hand assisted destemming, and these limit how much you can do. And the other thing is that we generally have a shortage of cuttings. Terry's been out there for 20 years promoting this. I've been out there for 10 years promoting it. And people are finally starting to listen. And so there's huge demand right now for cuttings. We seem to be running short on that. So if you get a hold of it's helpful if you've got someone in your neighborhood that already has something growing so you can see how well it's doing. But if you don't, then, get yourself a goodly number that's sort of anticipates where you'd like to go. I think if you're looking at something at 5 acres or more, you don't want to go more than half an acre to start with, because that itself will produce a couple thousand pounds of berries once it's established. And that's easy to sell if you decide you don't want to do it. Because it's too much work, or it doesn't fit in, or you can't get the labor or whatever. It's also plenty to use. But you want to try the different kinds, but and then that of course also gives you the ability to produce your own cuttings. And so most of our growers do that. If you've got a half acre of plants, by the time you're getting the second year, you can probably, plant 2 acres out of that, because you'll have enough cuttings off of those plants to do that. So that also helps on your expansion, and that way you can grow and manage your growth and be sure you can deal with the harvest, the destemming, the storage, and things like that. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you might test in a small area, but when you get to expansion, you want to plant in those blocks of the same cultivar, because the canes will literally go underneath your row, and you'll have if you have like an Adams and a Bob Gordon right next to each other, well, after a time, you're going to have Bob Gordon coming up in the middle of the Adams, and Adams coming up in the middle of Bob Gordon. And for a small producer, that's not a problem. But we already have some folks who say, well, I want ranch, or I want Adams. I've got someone who does a wine that's 25% ranch and 75% Adams, and he's done that because he's got the acid balance or whatever. I'm not a winemaker, but guys who do that can get very specific in what they want and what they're looking for. I hope that answers that question.
Great, thank you. So we got a couple here that have kind of been answered already, that I'll skip ahead to the question, who is the market and what are they making? I'm assuming that's in terms of products, but maybe in terms of money as well.
So the co-op has members from coast to coast, most of them in the Midwest, and about half of our members, or actually probably a little more than half, are smaller scale. And many of them make their own syrups, jams, wine is also popular, and they produce those on farm and sell them at farmers markets or in some local stores. So I would say those are the most common products: syrups, jams, jellies, and wine. Freeze-dried berries is coming on, because you can get a freeze dryer for a few $100 on Amazon.com, and that's very good. We've done a project on thermally dried berries, which is a huge market. I mean, Frontier Co-op alone imports over 100,000 pounds of thermally dried elderberries every year from Europe, and sells them, and always sells out. So that's what a lot of the American consumer is looking for, is the thermally dried berries. But once they understand the native, which smell a lot better than the European, I've got some testimonials on my sales pages from folks who switched from buying European dried berries to American dried berries. But even so, then I have a lot of folks that have been making syrups because I have several hundred small businesses that are beyond just on their farm, and they've switched over to either the frozen juice, which we have had in the past, or to our bulk frozen berries, and they find that's better, and they've been able to do that. And for the farmer, for the grower, they're going to make the most off of a bulk frozen berry, because you don't have to do anything once you've got it frozen, which we talk about in subsequent videos, Terry and I, but it's basically a 4-gallon, 25-pound pail. And you can sell those all day. So that's what small growers do. Commercially, you've got people that do those same products on a larger scale, or I do have supplements buyers that buy from me. I have others that do shrubs, like Terry does. And for Terry, River Hills Harvest, they do a pure juice and a honey cinnamon clove elderberry juice cordial, and then a jam, a jelly, and a syrup. And he also does an elderflower cordial. Terry likes to develop new products. I hope that's answering that question. That's, I mean, I have had trials and inquiries from using freeze-dried berries in candies, syrup sodas, granolas, muesli, um, and herbal infusions, of course, are also very common. I sell both flowers and berries to a number of herbal tea companies. That's the biggest part right now. Now, if we have more volume, then we've got folks that want to put it in yogurts, ice creams, ginger ale, and we have a lot of craft brewers that do elderberry beer as well as elderberry wine, kombucha brewers that do elderberry kombucha, and a lot of them that will mix elderberry with other fruits, ciders.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Maybe a shorter question here. This is, are dried elderflowers as healthy as non-dried?
Well, the thing is that, you know, whenever you process anything, you're going to lose something. But what we've also learned, and we've done some studies with AURI, which is Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, which is a nonprofit in Minnesota set up by the legislature that gives food science and more accessible to small-scale farmer and food producers in Minnesota. We're a client of theirs, and they did a project on the thermally dried berries, and what they found is that when you heat the berries, some of the antioxidants are enhanced and some of them are lost. So, and then you're going to find that, you know, I worked 5 years at Pillsbury, 3 of those with international R&D with a lot of food scientists. And depending on how you process it, always going to change your nutrient makeup and viability and stability. And small differences in that processing can have significant differences in how the nutrients are up. So it's not possible to really generalize other than to say that, you know, the more you process, generally the less you'll have available. But we also know that, you know, even cooking other foods sometimes releases access to the human body of, say, vitamin A. That's easier to absorb than when it's raw in some forms. So it just really depends. So both the fresh and the dried flowers are usually used to make a syrup. And so if you're going to make a syrup, if you can get the fresh or frozen flowers, because you can also freeze them. I've frozen fresh flowers for up to a year. And then we've made wine from them. I don't make the wine, but I have a friend who did that, who's my treasurer at the co-op. And he made some delightful elderflower wine off of my flowers that had been frozen for a year in a little small refrigerator in the garage that my wife wanted to get rid of. And so I had to do something with those frozen flowers. And he took them, and he said that the potency was 3 times the flowers in England where he grew up and had learned how to make elderflower wine. So you can freeze them as well. You just stuff them in a freezer bag and pack them loosely in a chest freezer. That works very well. The dried flowers, of course, keep without freezing. You can make a syrup from those as well. And you can also use them in other infusions. And so this is a long answer also to get to the short side, which is we need more research to actually test and evaluate those. You know, any research they've done in Europe on the flowers could give us some clue. I haven't seen anything. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But our flowers are significantly different. And I already know from like the researcher I mentioned earlier, North American elderflower will not substitute for the European palate on what they demand. So we can't export and meet their excessive demand for elderflowers because it just has a different profile, nutritionally, chemically, fragrance, everything. So, and it's not what they're going to be looking for. It's not that it isn't good. It's just, it's one of those things, you know, that they have a certain aroma that's what they're used to getting, and that's what they're going to expect, and you can't surprise them.
Great, thank you. We have a question that I think is kind of getting at establishing or starting up elderberry production, also with shade tolerance. Someone who has, you know, some fields that are in grass and then some more forested areas. what sorts of,
Okay, so generally
where would
speaking,
you want to start?
elderberry, a lot of times you'll find it on the forest edge. And you'll see that on a forest edge, it's got a lot of flowers and you get a lot of berries. I have in my yard, they fight with an elm tree and a honey locust tree. And so it took a little longer to get established because those root systems are really in there. But once they're established, they get light about a little over half the day, and it's sufficient. I get a very good berry crop, and they ripen quite well. And but out in the open field, they're going to do the best. And typically, also that we're also getting ahead. We cover this again, but typically, we encourage people to pick the flowers from ground up to about 3 or 4 feet when the flowers are blooming, in order to leave the higher flowers, because typically the lower flowers don't set as evenly. The berries a lot of times will pull the cane down into the ground, so you can't really use them and harvest them. And it's also SWD, the spotted winged Drosophila, which is the Asian fruit fly, is more low in the ground, and if the berries are there, it makes it too easy. So we'd rather have them up high where it's more airy and it's hotter. They don't like that. And so it helps for natural control of not only SWD, but other pests as well. And then puts more energy into those flowers that are higher and more likely to be harvestable, easier to reach, et cetera, and not blocking your aisles, as I mentioned earlier.
All right. I realize this would be a good time for me to mention that we're doing a number of other webinars on elderberries. So on September 7th, we'll be doing an elderberry harvest webinar, again, with Terry and Chris. And then September 29th, we'll have an elderberry processing and market opportunities webinar.
So I'm giving shorter type answers now, but do those other because we'll go into it in more detail. But I'm not going to shy away from giving you a quick answer so you kind of know what to be thinking about.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I just want to let people know that if they have specific questions that are more on the harvesting side or the processing and marketing side, we are going to be talking more about that in upcoming webinars. So I'm seeing a couple of questions here about pests, or I guess one before that specifically, we have one that is the addition of lactobacillus to the orchard specifically beneficial when growing elderberries?
I've heard people who like to do that. I don't know of any academic study. It certainly doesn't hurt. And, what is it, milky spore for controlling Japanese beetles has also been used. And I would recommend that. I mean, Japanese beetles, along with the Asian fruit fly, are two of the bigger pests for elderberry. The other things that they have, the cane borers or the aphid mites or the four-line bugs and some of the other things, just do very minimal around the edges kind of stuff. There is also a rust, which is basically hand controlled, and that goes through a sedge intermediary. So you don't want sedges, you want legumes and grasses in your undergrowth. But if you see it, you just cut it out. You got to remove it so you don't create more spores. It's not a real big problem.
Okay.
Yeah, the biggest problems are the Japanese beetles and the SWD. And we'll address those more specifically later.
Okay. I'm going to skip a couple more processing related questions here. A couple more establishment oriented ones. For half an acre, you had mentioned, how to get established. For half an acre planted, how many plants would you recommend?
Okay,
and
so
what would the spacing be?
Yeah, basically, when I was working with Paul Otten, we planted every 2 feet, simply because that led to quicker weed control. And weed control is very important. Weeds will outgrow elderberry the first year of the cuttings. Other people will plant them as far as 4 and 8 feet apart. It really depends on what your purpose is for the plant. You can plant them in islands, on berms, say, if you've got a lower, more marshy area, you build up berms and plant them across the top of the berms. and one of the largest growers outside of Toronto in Canada plants them in longest sort of islands and mows around them. The key is you don't want your masses of elderberry to be too thick. You want to be sure that you get a lot of sunlight through there and a lot of air. The even sunlight is very important for even ripening. Otherwise, what happens is the berries start falling off before they're all ripe. You don't want a lot of unripe berries. I mean, our destemming process helps with that. But and I have some wild ones, for instance, where the best thing is that I do have to wait till about 5 to 10% of the berries actually ripen and fall off before most of the rest of the sign is ripe. But that's more efficient overall. And of course, when you only have a few plants, this can be more critical, but on a commercial scale, a half acre, something like that, the labor becomes immediately far more important. So I suggest every 2 feet. You do need weed control, and that has varied from farmer to farmer, depending on what they have access to. Some people have access to a lot of old hay, so they use that. Some have access to wood chips. As long as it's hard and not a soft pine or something like that, that can work. Some folks have used county mulch, but you got to be careful on that. Has it been sprayed? You know, because chemicals there could hurt your plants, and that's something you really need to be aware of. Other people have used like it's the hay and the sawdust and stuff, you know, from poultry sheds that they have across the floor. I forget what you call that right off the top. I used to raise ducks, and that stuff is great for growing things. And you know, that really can also be good. And some folks have used weed matting, and some have used plastic. Now, if you are using plastic and you want to be certified organic, you've got to work that through with your certifier. And the thing about plastic is if you use it, you will need to pull it off after no more than 2 years, because it restricts the spread and health of the plant. Because that plant, American elderberry, has to spread. Those shoots have got to come up, and there's got to be air to the roots. And Paul was used to using plastic for like raspberries and things like that. And it was a problem, and I'm the one that tore it out. So I finally convinced him to start using wood chips, and that worked a lot better.
Sounds good. Just to follow up on that, how would you prepare the field before planting?
Okay, so you know, if you haven't gone to Moses or something like that, where you've got a number of presenters with a lot of deep experience on field management and cultivation and preparation, you should. I have a couple of references on the resources page of the co-op website on some websites where people, you've got very experienced farmers that consult on that, and they've got a lot of information on their own websites and how to go about that. But basically, you know, you need to get a soil test, and then you need to start amending it with healthy crops. And what that's required really depends on the history of your land that you're looking at and the nature of the land. And there is no set easy answer on that. Acres USA has a lot of information on that as well.
Okay. All right, we're getting down to the.
Say is that it's really important. Do your land preparation first, and even do it a year or two in advance. Okay, you will save the time, because the elders will get more rapidly established. If you've done your land preparation, you will have yield in 2 years. If you don't, it could be 3 or 4.
Okay. All right, we're starting to wind down here. Hopefully these will be some shorter questions we can stick in here. Is York a variety you're familiar with?
I'm familiar with it. I only know of one person who grows it. And
okay.
He's okay with it.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
I have no direct experience, and it's not one generally used.
Okay.
So if you've got it, try it and use it. It's not good for you.
Okay. How can you determine if a wild elder is a native or European?
If the berry is small, so like I said, you get 6 or so on a fingernail, that's native. Most of the wild are going to be native. I would be very surprised if you found a European elder in the wild. But those berries are significantly bigger, 4 to 5 times bigger than the native elderberries. And they're more square. The little native berries look like BBs.
Okay.
Or plum. Some of them are a little bit bigger.
Okay. And then we have a question. We've kind of gotten into this, maybe, I guess maybe not. What are some sources for obtaining elderberry cuttings or plants to get started?
Okay. So Terry Durham's the number one source, River Hills Harvest, and he starts taking pre-orders in October usually. And he produces a lot of cuttings, and he's a nursery. I do have some other farmers listed on the resources page on the Co-op and the Grow website. So there are a number of other growers that also sell cuttings. Natasha Simeon was trained by Paul Otten, who was a nurseryman and shipped stuff all over the world and had all those licenses and things. And so she knows what she's doing. I don't think she's gotten her license yet, but and most of your people selling cuttings, you want to make sure that they will replace them if they don't grow. Your good ethical people will do that. And the real key is that you get your first cuttings and then you start taking your own. And so, and basically the healthiest cuttings are those that are from like pencil size to finger size, and thumb size at the biggest. I mean, bigger will work, smaller will work. I've made them all work. But you know, in general, that's what you want to look for.
Great. Okay, we're down to our last question. So this is, if you have any final burning questions, put them in the chat. But we're kind of running out of time here, and I don't want to go too long. So our final question is, once established, how long does a bush live?
Well, you know, if you look in the books, they're going to say 25 to 30 years. But the simple fact of the matter is, because we're cutting them down every year, we're renewing them every year, because it sends up new canes every year. It will either bud off the base, the remaining small base of last year's cane, but when you cut it low enough, you know, under 6 inches, each of those canes are like a primal cane. What I found when we were doing a lot of experimentation with pruning at different levels and heights and things to see what happened, that those canes that may come off of the plant 2 or 3 feet above the ground were more susceptible to wind damage. If you had like an episode of strong straight line winds come through in the late spring, once they got started, those would get knocked off. Whereas that's less likely on a primal cane coming up from the ground, because it's linked more to the roots. And so that's you know, really, it's probably always going to be there. And I do know it's really hard to get rid of.
All right. All right. We are getting a few more questions here. Can you run cattle with elderberry? Maybe general thoughts on livestock integration.
We need to do more work on that in a systematic way. I have heard cattle producers say, well, I know my cows like to eat them. my herd will eat them. They like to eat elderberry, and we know that deer will browse on them. It's not their number one choice, but in some areas like Wisconsin, deer fencing would have to be a must, or because they're so thick. Where we farmed north of Stillwater in Minnesota, deer were not an issue. Birds were not an issue. I've got a farmer near Winona, Minnesota, down along the Mississippi River, and birds and deer are both an issue for him. He's got to have fencing for the deer and netting for the birds.
Okay. All right. I think we've covered.
Goats too. Goats will eat anything.
Yeah. All right.
Sheep are often grazed with elder in Europe, and sheep do not tend to eat them. So The thing there is that typically you're going to want to do it after harvest. But we have a lot of our growers are regeneration farming oriented, and some of them graze chickens with their elder. And I think we can do more with pigs and sheep than we have. And I would like to see people apply for USDA grants so they can get some money to do this and document it and share it with others. It takes a farmer to do that.
Okay. That sounds like a good motivation to end on there. So, yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you everybody for your questions and comments. I know I skipped some, but I think they'll fit better with some of our upcoming webinars. So just as a reminder.
They're good. I mean, I'm surprised at how good this tape turned out. And Terry and I felt from our side that everything went really well. So do get in the other tapes and coming up, because I think you'll enjoy them and learn.
Great.
As well.
Yeah. So those will be September 7th. That's a Monday. That'll be the evening, Monday, September 7th. We'll be talking about elderberry harvest. And then 12 p.m. noon, September 29th. That's a Tuesday. We'll be talking about elderberry processing and market opportunities. So information for both of those is on the Savannah Institute website. I'm guessing you all know how to find it since you made it to today's webinar, but we'll also have the recording from today available on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page sometime within the next week. And thanks again to everybody for joining us today. This is a really exciting crop. There's a lot of momentum behind it now, and Chris and Terry have been doing this for a long time and really know a lot about it. So we're really lucky to be working with them. So thanks a lot for joining us. And Chris, thank you so much.